2011s have sort of installed themselves as the new object of desire amongst handgun guys, and as a result there are a ton of options, a metric ton. And they're available at pretty much all price points except for, low ones. There's not really cheap ones, they're kind of cheap ones, but we'll get into it. So we'll go through kind of 3 tiers of pricing: a lower tier priced gun with the Mac 9 DS, a middle tier gun, which sounds crazy to say given its expensive price tag, with the Kimber 2K11 Pro, and one of the top end guns, the Atlas Gunworks Athena. We'll go through what the differences are at the different price points and just general chat about 2011 features, and we'll cap it off with a head-to-head comparison at the range. So real quickly, why did I pick the guns that I picked? Well, frankly, the Atlas Gunworks Athena is my most expensive 2011. It's more similar in length to a commander gun than it is a 5-inch gun. And similarly, my least expensive gun was a commander gun with the Mac 9 DS. So I needed something sort of in the middle, and the Kimber sort of fit that bill. Other options like Bull Armory would have made sense too, but they don't share the same magazine, so for simplicity's sake, I chose the Kimber to come with me to the range. So we use the Glock equivalency theory to talk about the guns and how they show up at the store, but the Mac 9 DS, when I bought it, it was about 1.5 Glocks. Now it's down to about 1.25 Glocks, and this is the old model. They've updated the model since with some fancier slide cuts. The Kimber is selling for about 3.5 Glocks, and the Atlas Gunworks is selling for 10 Glocks. Yeah, a bunch. I realized like half the people in this video just like left. You're not watching, you're commenting that the guns are too expensive and you're out, and I get it, but we're still gonna talk about it. But what does all that difference in cost actually mean? Now, I've said it before in other videos, but I'll say it here just for clarity, but the 2011 game is largely a flex game, and the diminishing returns curve is absolutely real, meaning that, you spend a bunch of money to get to X, and then, to get to 2X, you're spending a lot more money, and 3X is, way more. And I would say the price curve sort of reflects that. So we'll start with kind of the stuff that's most important to the flex bros, which is just manipulating the firearm at the gun counter or safe area at a match, those kinds of things. The Mac 9 is hands down the roughest of the field. The gun kind of unlocks violently, and then it sticks at the rear and catches on the disconnector. See that little nub in there? That is a disconnector. There's a fair amount of wobble of slide on frame, which is less important than you would think for accuracy, but it does contribute to accuracy. But it's clearly a gun that is machined to be assembled, probably not a lot of gunsmith adjustment on the pistol as it goes through assembly. The Kimber is a gun that is also produced at scale. It's intended to be kind of a higher volume gun, meaning that it is also machined for assembly, but at the same time, the slide is significantly smoother when you move it to the rear, and because it uses a Marvel cut, there is no hang up on the disconnector. The Atlas does that too. And what that means is basically there is a ramp that strips the bullets into the chamber from the magazine, and there is a notch in the Kimber's case that, doesn't catch the disconnector. There is a little bit of wobble of slide to frame, but, appreciably less than what is on the Mac. And the Atlas, on the other hand, is just like precision machine. Like, you can tell that the slide and frame were mated and then lapped to fit by a craftsman, and the people building 2011s who know how to do it come at a premium because there's not very many of those guys these days. So the gun's absolutely like butter. You have to experience. It's like rubbing 2 pieces of glass past each other. Like, that's what it feels like. It's super, super smooth. They use a different version of that cut, so there is no hang up on the disconnector.
See how it kind of ramps down to kind of clear the disconnector?
It's just a super fine, impressive gun, and there is almost zero wiggle. There's a little bit, but almost zero wiggle of slide on frame. And I put that first because that's one of the things the Flex Bros kind of drool over the most, but next most important would kind of be the controls. So just the manual safety on the Mac is very soft. There's not a like hugely positive click when it's in the up or down position. There is some click, but not a lot. Similarly, the trigger, it is the heaviest trigger of the batch, and it has, a fair amount of pre-travel and then, a decent amount of over-travel out of the box. It's a good trigger. It's better than a striker trigger, by a pretty good piece, but it's not like the other guns. Moving up the chain to the Kimber has a much more pronounced click when you put on and take off the safeties, and the trigger similarly is not quite as much pre-travel and a little bit less over travel than the other gun. Feels much more precise than the other gun. It's weighted more like you would expect a single action only gun to be weighted. It is a more impressive trigger out of the gun. And then coming up to the Atlas, the safeties are even a little bit nicer with how they kind of click on and off to the Kimber, just a little bit. But the trigger is bonkers. Like, there's almost no pre-travel, and then there's almost no over travel. It is really, really nice. It's a great trigger on the Atlas. And another thing when you're evaluating triggers is how the actual trigger bow and trigger is fit into the grip. And there is a fair amount of wiggle on the Mac. If you come up to the Kimber again, there is a little bit of wiggle as well, but there's notably less wiggle than on the Mac. And when you get up to the Atlas, it's very finely fit. There's some play because there has to be, it's a moving part, but it is very well fit to the grip, and there's the least amount of wiggle on the Atlas as you would expect. Now that's kind of a pause point right there, because some of you people are going to say, well, you can make the trigger on the Mac be like the trigger in the other guns, and yes, that's true. Getting a trigger bow to fit this existing grip module is going to be a little bit of a trick. Atlas, you know, machines their bows and triggers to fit in their grip, so that's why it fits so nicely. But at the same time, you'd be looking at not quite half a Glock to elevate the trigger on the Mac to the same tier as the Atlas or the Kimber. Now, the most expensive part to swap on a 2011 is going to actually be the grip module. And the grip module on the Mac, like if you've never held one before, but you have held something like a Ruger, and you know how the polymer feels kind of slippery on those guns, feels a little bit different from like the other service tier guns. That is very much what the Mac feels like it's made out of. It's made out of that kind of slippery polymer, and the texture that they've machined onto it isn't super bitey. Like, it just doesn't really bite into the hands at all. The shape of the grip is about what you'd expect because, you know, it's a 2011 grip, so they're all kind of samey as far as how they kind of fit in the hand. But at the same time, the grip is the most slippery of the ones, and that will affect how the gun plants in your hands when you're shooting rapidly. And the grip is arguably more important than the trigger, honestly, and how you can stabilize the gun if you're worrying about how fast you can shoot it and how stable it is at speed. The grip is more important than the trigger. Some people aren't going to agree with me on that, and you're wrong, but that's okay. In slow fire, it's a different conversation. Trigger is going to matter a lot. But when you're shooting kind of practically, the grip and how it plants in your hands and your ability to get your support hand involved in recoil management is going to be more important. Moving up to the Kimber, and this is where the stratification really takes off, is this has an MJD Solutions grip. MJD Solutions has this really fancy polymer that's like Kevlar impregnated. It's a super hard polymer, but more importantly, the texture isn't molded onto the grip, it's machined on, similar to how you would machine an aluminum grip like what's on the Atlas. And as a result, the texture on the front strap where it's supposed to be bitey is super bitey. At the back strap, it's got these octagons, which are a bigger, looser texture, but at the same time, when you push into it, your hand sinks into those kind of octagons there and really plants the gun in your hand. The grip is very, very nice on the Kimber right out of the box. And that makes a big difference when you actually can go and shoot the things. And the Atlas grip is just a complete different level of grip. First thing you'll notice is that it doesn't use a grip safety, which is, you know, a popular thing that people like on some 2011 pistols, but the grip itself is called their Alpha grip. They've actually got these panels that are retained by the magwell on either side. So I've installed the palm swell on the right side of the pistol and a ledge on the left side of the pistol. And what those two things do is I'm able to get my support hand behind the gun a lot more and contribute more to recoil management. It's a super, super nice grip. However, the problem with aluminum grips is they're a little bit more direct in recoil. You can feel the guns kind of dumping energy into your arms a little bit more in recoil because there's no give in the grip. But at the same time, with these machined textures that they have on most aluminum grips, it's not just the Atlas grip, it's like all of them, it's a little bit aggressive. It's not something you'd want against your stomach. And similarly, if you're at a match and your arm is going over the grip kind of all day, if you hit the grip wrong, you can tear up your forearm. So using something like a gun cover is generally a good idea when you have a metal grip that has kind of these aggressive aluminum finish on them. It's not a huge deal, but I have managed to draw blood on my forearm at a match with a very aggressive metal grip, not on the Atlas, but a different gun. Before we move off of kind of the flex game and stuff like that, let's look at the actual machining and the finishes used on the frames and slides. The machining on the Mac is pretty basic, kind of standard 1911. Not a lot of machining went into it, and the finish on the gun is a tinifer finish because it's made in Turkey. They can still do that over there. We can't do that in the United States based on EPA regulations, and dealing with all the heavy metals, just you can't really do it anymore. Tinifer is honestly a brilliant weapons finish, so it is a really good finish, but at the same time, you know, there's not a lot of guns that have this finish on them. Moving up to the Kimber, and you can see that these slide cuts have a lot more machine time. There are ports going into the slide so you can actually see the barrel through the slide, just a more stylized, and then they honed the flat parts of the gun and put a PVD finish on there. So it is just a more aesthetic finish. There's more machining, there's much more finishing going into it. It's a prettier gun, and you know, you pay for that kind of finish to make guns pretty. And coming up to the Atlas, there's even slightly more, you know, machining going into the slide. It has a DLC finish, which is similar to PVD, but even harder. And it's just, you know, a very, very fine weapons finish. But problem with DLC coating is they're only available in black. So you've got this awesome gun, but it's still only pretty much available in black if you go with DLC. Who knew? Diamond like carbon likes to be black.
Similar round counts on the Atlas and the Kimber. You can see there's almost no wear on the bottom of the slide on the DLC finish, whereas the Kimber Pro, you can kind of see where in friction it doesn't do great, so it does wear down on the bottom side of the slide.
Getting into kind of the guts of the guns, I don't know the spring weight that is installed from the factory. It's not published anywhere on the Mac, but I can tell you that the recoil spring feels the heaviest of the bunch. They're probably using the same 17-pound recoil spring that is in the gun. And those are the two springs that kind of affect how the gun is going to cycle. But also there is the firing pin stop. That's the little plate that's around the firing pin and retains it in the slide. That's why it's called a stop. But the Mac is using a radiused profile on the firing pin stop. Coming up to the Kimber 2K11 Pro, they're using a 12-pound recoil spring and a 17-pound mainspring, which is pretty standard. But the firing pin stop is a 45. It's just kind of cut on a 45. So that will affect how kind of the hammer moves when the gun is cycling. And the Atlas is actually unique in this regard. And this gun has a 9-pound recoil spring with a shock buff installed at the factory with a 17-pound mainspring. The firing pin stop is a 45 cut, but it's a different geometry from the Kimber. And as a result, the Atlas just feels the smoothest to rack. It doesn't take as much hand strength to move. However, that polymer shock buff we talked about is going to become a maintenance item. You're going to have to swap those out at about every 2,000 rounds. If you eliminate the shock buff, you're probably going up in spring weight as a result, so you don't get battering from slide on frame. Little quality of life features that each gun has. The Mac is a hollow guide rod that is removed using a tool. You got to capture it with a staple or a paper clip or, you know, a little tiny Allen key or something like that, which is fine, but it is a hollow guide rod. Moving up to the Kimber, it has a twist push sort of toolless guide rod, which is super nice for maintaining the gun. And the Atlas similarly has a toolless guide rod with a push button style guide rod. That's a feature that many people don't appreciate, but when you're shooting a gun a lot, being able to remove the guide rod without finding a staple or something like that, it's just a mega quality of life thing. And the other thing that the Kimber does differently from the other guns is it has an external extractor, which means that, you know, when the gun is getting super dirty, you're not going to have to pull the extractor and run a 22 jag through the extractor channel. And that's just kind of nice. With the external extractor, it keeps the guns running longer when they get dirty. It's kind of nice. Now, the scale and the number of units produced by the company will affect some of the manufacturing processes. So the Mac, because it's made in Turkey, has a lower cost of labor, and as a result, it has all machined parts on the internals. It's made from billet, which means that they're taking a piece of bar and they're milling it through reductive machining and generating the strongest pieces that you can generate, which sounds awesome. Conversely to that is the Kimber is manufactured at scale. They're moving more units of the Kimber, so they're using a metal injected molding process paired with kind of precision grinding. And what that does is some of the parts that take a long time to machine, like the ambi safeties, the grip safety, etc., are done with a metal injection molding process, which is more of like a molding or additive style of manufacturing. The parts aren't quite as strong. They're about 95% as strong, but the parts that are in question is really just the ambi safety, the sear, the grip safety, and the firing pin stop, which, you know, grip safety is not that big a deal. The firing pin stop is, you know, I've never seen one fail. And the ambi safety, I've seen all kinds of ambi safeties fail, whether they are machined from billet or if they're metal injection molded. They all eventually fail just based on the design of the ambi safeties. And what the metal injection molded parts is get you kind of speed in manufacturing. It doesn't tie up machines as long. And through the precision grinding, they're able to assemble the guns very precisely without doing stuff like fitting safeties. All the safeties are basically fit to the sears because they all have matching geometry through the precision grinding process. But so far so good. I did a 6,000 round review of these Kimber pistols. All of the parts are still holding up, so I don't perceive it to be an issue, but it is something that contributes to the different price points. The 2011s are known for being very accurate pistols, so I took it to the range and put them on a rest and shot at 25 yards. I shot a 115 range load from Buffalo Creek Ammunition. They're a supporter of the channel. Yeah, you know what that does. So starting with the MAC actually grouped the 115s pretty well. That is a very respectable group, but when I switched to my 147 hand loads that I use in competition, the groups opened up dramatically, and I shot those second, so you would have expected better accuracy. Didn't deliver on that. Because it's a sample size of one, I can't say that that barrel's rifling doesn't like 147s or anything like that. It could just be that that projectile and that barrel don't get along. But moving up to the Kimber actually did a better job with both the 115s and the 147s, grouping them very similarly. And going up to the Atlas, it did kind of the same with the 115s. But when you go up to the 147s, that's where the accuracy really starts to shine. The Atlas barrel is getting the most out of the, you know, good projectiles that I'm using in my competition loads, and it's delivering just amazing accuracy. But bench rested slow fire groups, is it exploitable at distance and stuff like that? Well, not really. Let's look at some bill drills at 10 yards. Shot the MAC first, got good results with the 115s, as you would kind of expect, all alpha. Then moved up to the Kimber, and the grip on the Kimber made the gun feel a lot more stable. Got a little bit better results there.
Oh, that grip makes a big difference.
The Atlas was very similar to the Kimber in that regard.
Atlas Athena 10-yard bill drill. Honestly, it's about the same as the MAC.
And if you actually look at the guns side by side, you can see that the times were basically identical with how the guns were shot. But here's the fun part. Inside 10 yards with my current level of skill, that's not really a test for the guns. It's not really going to highlight the differences. When you're testing something, you want to test it on kind of the more edge of your ability to see what difference it's going to make, because that's honestly where the equipment is going to benefit you the most. The MAC at 25 yards for the bill drill, I was just fighting the gun. I felt like I had to fight the gun to get it to return to the center of the target. The dot wasn't tracking straight up and down. And back to what we were talking about with the grips, that's going to be the biggest difference on that grip, is the grip is not stabilizing the gun in hand. So, you know, the dot would lift, it'd come down on the left, it would come down kind of high and right. It was just kind of all over the target with how the gun was returning. Now, that is a skill issue. I could learn how to stabilize that gun if I spent enough time understanding how the gun moves, but just, you know, off the draw, being cold, that's what the grip delivered. Moving up to the Kimber, the MJD grip that the Kimber has is excellent. I felt like I had more confidence, more control of the gun, and as a result, I only dropped one Charlie. Yeah, there were 7 holes on the target because I didn't tape one of the max holes, but there was 1 Charlie, and that was from the Kimber. There were 5 alpha. Going up to the Atlas at 25 yards, I felt like I had the same control of the Kimber, but when I reeled the target in, I realized that I failed the Atlas. You can see some shots low and left, and that is indicative of me failing the gun and over pulling the trigger, so that's kind of to the left and a little bit low. It's a grip issue, but at the same time, if you're mashing the trigger, which I was, I'm just not used to the way the Atlas trigger is set up. I would need to learn how to exploit it. I believe that the gun is absolutely capable of doing everything like the Kimber. It's just I'm personally not trained up on how to use that trigger. And that's why I mentioned grips are more important than triggers, because you can learn how to pull a trigger in pretty much any weight, but at the same time, you do have to get used to whatever trigger is on the equipment. Simply having a nicer trigger isn't going to make you shoot the gun particularly nicer. When you line up the clips side by side, you can see that I felt about the same with the Kimber and the Atlas, but the Mac, you could see that I was fighting and it was a little bit slower. But don't just take my word for it, because my buddy Danny, who is a sometimes cameraman and an excellent bench rest shooter, was at the range as well. And so he was able to shoot the guns and was able to get these accuracies from them. This is Danny with the 115s out of the Mac DS9. This is the Atlas with the 115s from Danny. That's the Kimber 2K11. That's a flyer, but that's pretty good. He shot the practical drills, but his grip was smoked after just shooting a match, and as a result, you know, he performed kind of samey with all the guns, but he did weigh in on the guns as far as he saw them. All right, those three guns, what'd you think?
Mac needs a lot of work done. It could be a good gun, but out of the box, nah, not worth it. The Atlas, fine gun. It tends to jump, in my hands, it jumps around. A little heavy on the front end, but I think I could learn how to use it. Kimber, super easy out of the box. Super great. Fast return, man, it's...
Again. So, asking price for each one of those guns, would you pay it?
The Mac, definitely not. It's not worth it. The Kimber is absolutely worth it. There's not much you need to do. Maybe, I mean, if you prefer a lighter trigger, that's all you need, but it's a great gun. Atlas, pricey.
So that's a no for the Atlas then?
Yeah.
So where does that leave us? Well, at the beginning of the video, I told you about kind of the diminishing returns curve of spending, you know, from 0 to 1 cost a bunch of money, and then going up from 1 to, call it 1.5, and the Kimber did get more performance going up, but you're basically spending a lot more money to get at that performance, and going up again to the Atlas, and there wasn't a huge difference in what I was able to get out of the Atlas from what I was able to get out of the Kimber. So just because a gun is finer and costs more doesn't mean that you can necessarily exploit it. Now the Atlas is a super, super fine pistol, but let's not kid ourselves that that means you can exploit the performance that is offered from the super fine pistol. And because it is a 2011, it doesn't mean that you couldn't elevate the max performance with, you know, grip swap or trigger job as well. But at the same time, out of the box, you can see what you get. So I've done video reviews on all three of these pistols. You can check them out on the channel, and I appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.